Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today. My name is Ari Sowers with Respondus. We are going to spend the next maybe 45 to 60 minutes together talking about two applications that can help you prevent cheating during your online test. So this is an instructor training on LockDown Browser and Respondus Monitor. Before we jump in, though, a little bit of housekeeping. You are looking at this presentation, watching this presentation through a platform called GoToWebinar. You might be using a browser, in which case your presentation is going to be in the big blue space I'm showing you right here. But what's important is over on the right-hand side, you have access to a control panel. Now, if you've downloaded a little app to view that way, there is also a control panel. It looks kind of like this. When you open it up, you'll have a place to submit questions to us. You'll also have audio information should you need that. Just know everyone is muted. You can't talk. These sessions are really big. So feel free to submit your questions at any time, and we're going to read the questions out loud at the end. So you will not get a written answer. Or if we run out of time, we'll follow up with you after the session. And if you need any help with the audio or you have any technical challenges, go ahead and submit questions there too. As for listening in, you can listen through the speakers on your computer, or you can switch to dialing in by phone should you need to. You choose either option. That information is in the control panel as well. As I mentioned, though, as we jump on in, today's training is going to cover two applications that both help you prevent cheating during online tests. The first is called LockDown Browser, which can be used as a standalone application, but it is also a part of the second application called Respondus Monitor. Those two together make up our remote or automated proctoring solution. Throughout the training, we will share some tips and best practices, ways that you can be successful using both applications. So hopefully you'll come out of today learning how to get started. Speaking of that, I want to find out how many of you are already using one of these tools. I'm launching a quick poll that is going to ask you, do you currently use LockDown Browser with your online tests? Yes, no, or maybe it's been a really long time. If you do, don't worry, I'm not going to bore you. We will cover LockDown Browser, but we're going to talk about advanced settings and, again, some of those best practices that maybe you haven't heard before. And there's some new things to show off as well. If you've never used LockDown Browser before, or it's been a long time, and it's looking like that is almost exactly half of you here today, then you will learn soup to nuts everything you need to know about LockDown Browser. So we're going to not go over anybody's head. And of course, submit questions if you need to. So thanks for answering the poll. We are split just about 50-50 with people who have used it recently or use it now, who have never used it before. So thanks for answering that. All right, so starting with what is LockDown Browser for the half of you who have never used it before. LockDown Browser is, as I said before, it's an application. It's a browser. So it's the same category of applications as browsers you would use to, connect to the internet, like Firefox or Internet Explorer or Safari. But it has one job that it does very well, and that is to prevent cheating during online tests in your learning management system. LockDown Browser was designed to be used in proctored test environments, kind of like in that little picture there. Maybe it's your classroom, maybe it's a testing center or computer lab, because what it does is it prevents digital cheating. So it will stop the student from using tools on their computer to access other resources or share test questions. And we'll talk about exactly how it does that in a moment. It's also worth noting that LockDown Browser integrates with a lot of different learning management systems, Blackboard, Brightspace or D2L, Canvas, Moodle, Schoology, and a few others. And excuse me, and the way it works, and we're going to show you today, is that it allows you to set up your tests and quizzes so that they require the use of LockDown Browser. When students are using LockDown Browser, they can't print what's on the screen, capture the content in any way. They can't visit any other websites. So they're not going to be able to open another tab or window in LockDown Browser and Google stuff. And they can't access any other applications. So with LockDown Browser, they really are not going to be able to launch an instant messaging program and communicate with somebody, open a Word document, or open a different type of browser. Now, for those of you who are thinking, well, I want my students to do some of those things, there are exceptions that you can make, and we're going to talk about some of those advanced settings really briefly today. But first, what I want to do is back up a little bit and talk about the instructors or your perspective of using LockDown Browser. What does this look like? How do you set up your tests and quizzes so that they require a LockDown Browser? And then I'll take the test as a student. And as I'm going through this and showing you the application, I want to make one point that I made briefly earlier, which is LockDown Browser is a part of how Respondus Monitor works, which is the second application we're going to cover today. So if you're here really to hear about the webcam-based solution for unproctored tests, don't doze off here. You'll want to pay attention because this is all part of how Respondus Monitor works. LockDown Browser is a part of that second application. But let's start with showing you the LockDown Browser settings in a course. So I'm switching my screen and I'm going to log into an online course here as an instructor. Now, I'm using Canvas as an example today. So those of you that use Canvas, this might look familiar. If you don't worry. The way LockDown Browser and Respondus Monitor work is almost exactly the same across all of the learning management systems that we work with. So once I open the LockDown Browser tool, that part is going to look identical. So don't get too worried about that. The only difference really is where, as an instructor, you click to open the LockDown Browser dashboard, where you'll find those settings. And if you want to see where to find those settings in your specific learning management system, feel free to submit that as a question, and we'll come back to that. But for now, what you'll notice in my course here is I have a bunch of tests and quizzes that I've already set up. And this is actually a really important point for all of you first-timers out there. LockDown Browser is the browser. The test itself is in your online course. So it's a quiz, it's a test in Canvas, in Blackboard, in Moodle, or whatever you're using. So all of the content for your test, all the test questions and all of the settings, time limits and point values and all of those things are handled by your learning management system. And that's really important to keep in mind when you think about what you want to do with those tests, is that LockDown Browser isn't delivering the test, it's the browser. The same way that you would use Firefox to access your online courses without LockDown Browser. So I have those tests and quizzes already set up. I'm going to open the LockDown Browser dashboard tool, which in most learning systems is in the course menu. So you'll just look for a link that says LockDown Browser or Respondus LockDown Browser. And when you open that, the first thing you're going to see is this nice welcome screen that has some resources built in for you. So if you don't use this until 3 weeks from now and you've forgotten everything I said today, I won't be offended. You can also come back to this screen and watch some brief video tutorials that will be specific to your learning system. Or there's a tab here with some information on how to get started, and we're going to come back and talk about some of these resources specifically at the very end. For now, I'm going to continue into LockDown Browser. And now this is my dashboard where I can manage my LockDown Browser settings and also, as we'll get to later, the Respondus Monitor settings. What you're seeing here is a list of all those tests and quizzes that I already created, again, in my online course. So I can choose which ones I want to use, which tools. I'm going to open this week 3 quiz right here, selecting this drop-down menu and selecting settings to change the LockDown Browser or Monitor settings for this quiz. Now I'm going to turn LockDown Browser on. And when I see that, if I scroll down, a few more things appear once I turn on the LockDown Browser requirement. There's passwords and advanced settings here that we'll talk about in a minute. You also see the Respondus Monitor settings underneath if your institution has enabled this. And we can talk about how that works at the end during Q&A as well. I'm going to come back to the Respondus Monitor settings in the second part of today's training. Today, though, I want to talk about what's underneath the LockDown Browser settings. First of all, most learning management systems have a password setting for password protecting your tests when you're using LockDown Browser. In this LMS, it's called an access code. This is just another layer of security you can add to the experience of students taking tests with LockDown Browser. So, for example, it's most commonly used when an instructor is sending students to some kind of proctored testing center. And they want to make sure that a student can't just walk up to any computer and start taking the test on their own. They have to check in with a proctor or show ID or put their books away or their devices or whatever. So you could create a password and then give it to the testing center or the proctor. But it's optional. So if you don't fill this field out here, LockDown Browser does not password protect the test. Under advanced settings, it's worth talking about a few of these things because I did say earlier that LockDown Browser typically prevents the use of other resources, things like, other websites and other tools, but you certainly may have situations where you want to give students access to other websites or a digital calculator or something like that. So there are a list of a couple of these settings here that cover a few of those things, like adding calculators. What this checkbox here does is it adds a digital version of a calculator in the toolbar of the browser itself. You have a standard or scientific option, and that allows you to give students access to that kind of tool, but without them having to bring a device into the testing center, which could be, a way that the students could possibly cheat. Other things you'll see here, are the ability to allow students to use an iPad if you want students to be able to take their tests on that type of tablet. We support LockDown Browser can be installed on Windows and Mac computers. And we also have a special iPad app that students can use, but instructors can decide if they want students to be able to use that app or not. There's also a setting here to allow access to websites. So if you want students to visit a website and do research, not just one web page, a quick link, but an entire site where they might need to use a search tool or some kind of calculation tool, this checkbox says allow access to specific domains. The domain is just a really short part of the web address after the 3 W's. So for example, if I want all my students to access the Respondus website, do some research, and then come back and answer test questions, I can allow them to get to this entire domain. So it means they can go and visit any page on respondus.com. I also, though, as an instructor, I have to put a link to that website in the test question because students are not, as you'll see in a moment, they're not going to be able to type in a web address. You have to give them a link. This is really useful. Again, if you want students to, visit, maybe it's a media site, maybe it's, a place that has different videos you want them to watch. Maybe it's an ebook. So there's a lot of things you can do with that. But of course, if you don't need it, don't use it. And then one at the top here is worth just mentioning briefly because I'll show you what this looks like. LockDown Browser has a feature where it will allow a student to safely exit the exam if they haven't submitted it for grading, should they run into some kind of emergency. The power goes out or they get interrupted or they get sick. If you don't want that to happen though, like say you're giving tests in a very tightly proctored environment, maybe it's your own classroom, and you don't want students, trying to exit on their own, you can check this setting here that says lock students into the browser until the exam is complete. And there's a little explanation here. There's one, link to each one of these features if you want more details. But this one in particular is worth reading before you use it. And I'll try to sum up what this says. Is basically you really only want to use this setting in a proctored environment. If you use this setting in an unproctored environment and a student is on their own, they will not be able to exit the browser application if the power goes out. So you don't want to use this when students are taking tests remotely. This is really just to add another heavy layer of security to a proctored test. And if you do this, you can also set an exit password and again give that to proctors if there is some kind of widespread outage or emergency. But for most tests, you want to leave this one alone. And I'll show you why. That early exit feature is not something students can do very easily. They actually have to provide an explanation why they're leaving the exam early. And I'll show you exactly what that looks like when I take this test as a student. But once you've applied the LockDown Browser settings, chosen any advanced settings, and I talked a lot longer than this actually takes, you can click Save and Close. And now my week 3 quiz right here says requires LockDown Browser in the name of the quiz, which is a very useful thing for students to see. This will show up in their courses. So they'll know, oh, I need this browser to take this test or quiz. And then also instructors can see in the LockDown Browser column that I have this required. And I don't have the webcam required. We're going to come back to that. So that is really all it takes from the instructor's perspective to set up a test or quiz so that it requires LockDown Browser. Now I want to show you what this looks like from the student's perspective. Now students, when they go to take a test that requires LockDown Browser, and we'll talk about how to prepare them in a couple of different ways, but one thing students are going to need is the browser itself. And as the note on the screen explains, students can install the browser on their own computers if they have a Windows or a Mac, laptop or desktop or an iPad. If they're going to install it to Windows or Mac computers, they need a link that comes from their institution, from their school, from you. That link is unique to your institution. So every school, college, university, district that licenses LockDown Browser has their own version of LockDown Browser that will point to your online classes, your Blackboard or Canvas or Moodle or whatever server. So that means that a student has to get that link from somewhere at the school. Some institutions, it's embedded in the learning system. When a student tries to start a test, they'll see a link to download the browser. Some will choose rather to give it out to students directly. It can be posted, inside your learning system. It can be put in your syllabus. I recommend it go in a couple of different places. And it's really important that instructors and students alike understand that they need to get their school's version of the browser. They can't just go to the internet, Google LockDown Browser, because whatever they find won't work. And we don't give it out. It's not like on our website. Again, Windows, Mac, or the iPad app is in the App Store, and they can set that up too. Use it only if you've allowed it using that advanced setting. The last note on the screen says, or they can use a lab computer. So if they're going to that testing center on campus or that classroom where you have computers set up, they can take the test on machines they don't own, but the browser will have to be pre-installed for them, because most times institutions don't let students just install things to computers that the school owns. There is a version of LockDown Browser called the Lab Edition. I'm not going to go into a ton of detail about that. It's just important for everybody to know that it's a slightly different installation process, but the way it works for the student is exactly the same. So teachers, instructors, if you're going to send students to a testing center or lab, just make sure that LockDown Browser has been installed there before you tell students where they can take their tests. All right, enough of that explanation. What I'm going to do now is switch over to my desktop so I can put my student hat on and actually take a test using LockDown Browser. Now, here's where that 1% difference in between the different learning systems that we integrate with, these applications work with, this is where one of the differences is. So if you are using Canvas, like I am right now, or Blackboard or Moodle, students need to start LockDown Browser first and then log into their courses. That's the order, and then that's where the difference ends. If you are using Schoology or Brightspace, formerly known as D2L, students can automatically launch the browser from within their courses. So the order is log into course, then launch browser. And then that, again, is where the difference ends. And again, I'm happy to show this in more detail for any of you Brightspace or Schoology users out there. I'm going to launch the browser first. This is the first thing I need to do. So I'm not opening Firefox or Safari or Chrome or Edge or any of those other browsers. I'm opening LockDown Browser because my instructor required this for my test. You're going to notice two things when LockDown Browser is open. First of all, it takes over my whole desktop. I'm sharing my entire desktop with you right now, so you'll see a lot of white space for the moment because LockDown Browser opens full screen, and it stays that way. So students can't resize that screen and access things they might have had on the desktop. Also, you see this little message here. This might not happen every time. It depends on what students have running on the computer before they start the test. I left a program called Trillian open. That is an instant messaging program, kind of like the old AIM, AOL's old product, or Yahoo Messenger, one of those, where I could chat with people. LockDown Browser detects and requires that students shut down types of applications that they could use to cheat. So think communication tools, Skype, screen sharing applications like Snagit, even things like Spotify and iTunes, where they could be running, music or, cheat sheets read out loud in the background. It will shut down all those other applications or require that the student do it. And it's asking me to close a couple things. Now, it doesn't shut down every application that runs in the background. We are not going to, or LockDown Browser is not going to require that students close their antivirus or security software. We want to leave those things running safely, but they're running in the background. And as you'll see in a moment, students are not going to be able to get to those applications. So now what I'm doing is logging into my online course. I'm navigating to where my quizzes are posted, and then we'll see that week 3 quiz right here that says requires LockDown Browser. When I start the quiz, and I've taken this one quite a few times already, you'll see that it looks like a pretty straightforward quiz. There's nothing really crazy different about the fact that I've got some multiple choice questions here. I can use my text editor. This is all, if I can spell things right, This is all part of the test and the content and the settings for the test that are in my learning management system. So, notice at the top there or over here, it's got a timer going. I have a 30-minute limit to take this test. All of those things are handled by your learning management system. So none of them are different because I'm in LockDown Browser. What is different, though, is what I can access as a student. So I mentioned a few things already, the fact that it's open full screen. And if you look in the upper right-hand corner, there's no minimize or resize buttons up here. Those don't exist. So I can't change the shape of this window or swipe it out of the way. I won't be able to get to things on my desktop. In addition, if you kind of draw your eyes over to the left, there's no file, edit, help, those types of menus. There's no web address field right here, so I can't type in another URL, another website like Google. I can't open another tab or window of LockDown Browser. Across the bottom, and I promise I'm showing my whole screen, you can't see my start button or my system tray anymore. On a Mac, it would cover up the dock. So I'm not going to be able to use those icons or menus to switch to other applications or open files. And when I'm in a LockDown Browser required exam, I can't use things like keyboard shortcuts, function or command keys, Control P to print, Alt Tab. All of those things are disabled. So I'm not allowed to, physically can't open another application or file or shrink my screen or do all these things that might let me access cheat sheets or share the content of the test. I also talked about some of those advanced settings, and we left the calculator on here. So just to show you what that looks like, it floats. I could close it and open it again as I need it. This is the scientific version. There's also a standard one. We also talked a little bit about that early exit feature before, where the student can close the browser safely if something comes up that prevents them from finishing their test. Here's what that looks like. If I click that red X button in the upper right, there's a message that will pop up that says to the student, hey, don't close the browser. You haven't finished your test yet. I haven't answered all my test questions, and click submit. And the note also says your instructor will be notified if you exit early. So this is how we notify the instructor. If I click close the browser, I'm required to type in some kind of explanation here. Why am I leaving the test early? And then my instructor, you guys, will see that explanation in the instructor dashboard under a setting called Review Early Exits. So as instructors, when you see that incomplete attempt, you've answered 10 of 50 questions, what happened, you'll also get to see in the student's own words their explanation. So, legitimate emergencies do happen. Fire alarms go off, power goes out. They can provide you with that explanation so you're not trying to figure it out. It also holds the student accountable. If they are trying to do something dishonest here, they'll think twice. But I'm going to return to the test and just finish taking it. And you can see I've got typical test questions. I can embed, as an instructor, I can embed things like images if I want to. I can include video, audio files, anything my learning system will let me do. But any links within of those tools, unless I have specifically allowed students to go to other websites, won't work for me. I might be able to go to one web page, but I won't be able to surf the whole internet, use Google, and look up answers and all those things. I'm going to submit the quiz for grading, so I'm done with it, even though I probably didn't get those questions correct. It does this, confirmation page. This would look like your learning system's confirmation, and then I just close the window, and I'm done. So that was using LockDown Browser by itself. And by itself, it does a great job of addressing those concerns around students digitally cheating, printing, copying, pasting, sharing questions, looking up answers. Once we take the student away from that proctored environment, though, once they're, taking tests remotely in fully online programs and hybrid programs, LockDown Browser does not address a couple of key issues, and I'm sure a lot of you already thought about these things. What if the student has external resources? We didn't see what was around me, or that I had another device in my lap, or I had notes out, or another person in the room. It also does not address issues around student identity. I just logged into my online courses. I didn't have to prove who I was. And those two things are really big concerns for institutions, especially those growing online course offerings and online programs. And that's where Respondus Monitor comes in. So Respondus Monitor is our automated proctoring solution. It includes LockDown Browser, so everything you just saw is a part of how Respondus Monitor works. Think of Respondus Monitor as LockDown Browser plus a webcam, just like in that little picture. Respondus Monitor's job is to deter or prevent cheating from happening in the first place. in those non-proctored environments. Like I said, maybe it's fully online programs, maybe it's face-to-face programs, but you know, you don't have room in the testing center, or your instructors don't want to use class time for giving tests. They'd rather use it for teaching. The way Respondus Monitor works is the student will use LockDown Browser and a webcam, and that webcam will record them during the entire test session. So they'll be on camera the whole time. Now that means that students can't, or they'll be recorded if they do anything dishonest. So again, the idea is to prevent cheating from happening in the first place because the student knows they're being recorded. Now, they're recorded, and that means there's a video of them and some other data, and the instructors are able to review that information, including prioritized videos with a new feature called Review Priorities that I'm going to show you, something we just implemented a couple weeks ago. There are also automated flags pointing out suspicious behavior, and again, I'll show you examples of all of these things. And like LockDown Browser, Respondus Monitor integrates with a lot of different learning management systems, including those listed that we've talked about before: Blackboard, Brightspace, Canvas, Moodle, Schoology, and a few others. Now, Respondus Monitor is a companion to LockDown Browser, so we kind of talked about that already. You know, practically speaking, that means that as instructors, you'll use the same dashboard in your course to access both application settings. And students are going to use the same browser, the same LockDown Browser application we just saw. So if you're already using LockDown Browser, this is a very easy thing to transition to because you're already familiar with a good portion of how it all works. So just like before, I'm going to take you through what it looks like as an instructor to set up your tests to require both LockDown Browser and a webcam. Then I'm also going to show you what it looks like, again, from the instructor's perspective, to review the video and the other data, if you need to, that gets captured and collected and presented after a Respondus Monitor enabled exam. And then I'll take the test again as a student so you can see exactly what that looks like. So I'm going to go back to my online course. Again, I'm logged in here as an instructor. Students do not have a dashboard. When I open the LockDown Browser dashboard again, I get my list of tests and quizzes, and we just took this week 3 quiz right here with LockDown Browser alone. So now let me add the Respondus Monitor requirement. So if I scroll down under the LockDown Browser settings, here's the requirement to require Respondus Monitor for this exam. Now notice underneath that, it also says either Respondus Monitor or a proctored lab can be used to take this exam. Now this is a way that as instructors you can give students a choice of how they're taking this test. They can either take the test with LockDown Browser and a webcam from home, from wherever they are at whatever time they're allowed to, or if they choose not to use a webcam, maybe they don't have one yet, maybe you're just testing the waters here, maybe they have some legitimate reasons not to want to use a webcam, you can set it up so that students can choose LockDown Browser and webcam, or just LockDown Browser and a proctor, and that's what this setting means. There's a note here that explains to students that are taking the exam in a proctored lab still need LockDown Browser, and they need to be led into the test by a proctor using a password. So if you see above where we talked about this password or access code here, this is now a required field. So I would create a password, give it to the testing center or the lab, and then students who don't have a webcam or don't want to use one, that's how they take the test. So they can't access it with just LockDown Browser alone. It's all nice and seamless. It's all done, you know, in one setting, so instructors don't have to set up 2 tests for 2 different environments, so it offers a lot of flexibility. And also for those of you that are just starting out and you're thinking, well, maybe I, you know, test the waters and see which students would prefer which environment, this is a great way to do that as well. I'm just going to require Respondus Monitor across the board just to keep things simpler today. What you're seeing underneath the Respondus Monitor settings once I turn them on is a list of items that we call the startup sequence. Let me skip down here. It's like cutting off the bottom of my screen. There we go. These items are a series of steps that students go through before they start to take a test when they're required to use Respondus Monitor. I'm going to go through all of them just to explain what they are, and then we'll see them all. But it's worth noting that, you know, 4 or 5 of them can be deselected. You don't need to use all of them. This is entirely up to you, your needs as an instructor or for this individual exam. The only one you can't uncheck is the one at the top. That's called the webcam check. And what that does the name sort of implies, it makes sure that a student has a working webcam in place before they start the test. That's how we make sure they have a webcam. They can't bypass this. No webcam, no test. Now, it does a few other things in addition to checking the webcam, things like system and network and an internet connection and things like that. We're going to show you that because I'm going to take this test as a student. And then, like I said before, the next couple of settings are optional. There's one called Student Photo, which basically takes a picture of the student. So if you want to use that to help confirm identity, you can compare that to an official photo from the institution, for example. There's also a step called Show ID, which also takes a photo using the student's webcam. And this one will have the student hold up and take a picture of a form of identification. And maybe, you need to customize the directions here. You only want them to use, a college photo ID or a government-issued photo ID, or anything with their face and their name on it is okay with you. Library cards, things like that. So you can customize the directions that go with that, whether that's something that's your preference or if there's a school policy. These two steps are part of how we help to confirm the student's identity. And again, so making sure that the right person is taking the test. You can use one or both or neither. It's really up to you because you'll also see the student in the video itself. The environment check is the next step, and instead of being a photo, this is actually a video. And in this case, the student is going to take their camera and record the area around them. So we're doing a video of their environment to check to make sure that they don't have any resources that are prohibited within arm's reach. So maybe we want to make sure that the books and papers and mobile devices are out of the way. We might also want to make sure the students are alone in the room. That is a very common use of this feature. And I will tell you, in the 5-ish years that this application's been out and the hundreds, maybe thousands of instructors that I've worked with, this is used in a lot of different ways. Some instructors don't use it at all. We are recording the entire assessment session. Some see it as unnecessary or just extra. Some just have students do this sort of cursory scan of what's around them because what's most important to them is really just putting that idea in the student's head that they shouldn't have these things out. Some don't use it because they have open book tests, and so papers and books and notes are allowed. It's just a different type of exam. And there's a lot of different other ways to use it too. And then last in this list are additional instructions, and that's, I hope, pretty self-explanatory. It's just a text space, a page that students will see before they start the test where you can remind them of things like time limits or allowed materials or what to do if there's an emergency. A very common use of this setting is to include the honor code or a snippet or something that reminds students, do your own work, don't look up answers. If you get caught, this is what will happen, as a deterrent by itself. That's not a bad idea. So once I've picked my startup sequence items, done any customization, I can even drag and drop and reorder them if I want to. I can save and close those settings. And now here's my week 3 quiz. And it says requires LockDown browser plus webcam. So again, my students will see that. Then in both the LockDown browser and Respondus monitor columns, this test says required. So now I've set this up correctly. So my students will be required to use a webcam and LockDown browser to take the test. Now what I want to do is just switch gears a little bit. I will take this test as a student for you, but just to switch and show you what it looks like after the instructor, after the students, have taken the test and they've been recorded. So I'm going to open this first test at the top, this midterm, where I know some students have completed the test already. Once there are some videos available, you'll see an item in this menu called class results. Now, this is part of this update that we recently did where we added some more features and redesigned the user experience of the LockDown browser dashboard. And this is what I think is the most exciting part. This used to be called video review, which was pretty self-explanatory, but now there's a little bit more powerful data in there. So it's called class results to encompass that. Now I'm going to open that up. And when I do, what I'm seeing right away at the top here is a summary of what happened. How many students completed the test, haven't attempted it yet, and this prioritization right here. And this is really the biggest and I think most exciting part of these updates that we've done. We have added this feature called Review Priority that basically tells you or points out really quickly which of these videos is the most problematic, has, you know, a number of flags or poor quality video or something to that effect. So you can see right away, not just from the summary at the top, but also this column here, which student is a high or medium or low priority. So that gives you a very quick, fast way to hone in on or to really zoom in and figure out which students require or may require more attention. You'll also see other data, the student's name, the date and time they submitted the exam, their grade if that's available, the duration of the video, and you can sort these columns any way you want, but the high priority ones will be at the top by default. Now, in many cases, anything more than just a cursory scan might not be necessary. You might see no high priority or even medium videos here, and you can move on. The goal is to provide more meaningful results and not just a list of, you know, flagged events or data that you have to go figure out yourself. But if you do see something you don't like or something that looks suspicious, you can investigate more deeply if you want to, if you need to. So we can expand a student's record right here in line. And when we scroll down, what we're seeing is, first of all, the video player is right here. So this is where I can watch the video if I need to. We get a summary of that prioritization here. So this one's a high priority video. It tells me how many flags are here. Flags are specific events that we point out. I'll explain those in a minute. How much time was flagged out of the whole video. This is only a 15-minute long exam, so that's about half. And then underneath it is something called facial detection, which is the proportion or percent of time that the camera could detect, or the video software could detect a student's face. And that's important. You know, if the face cannot be detected, then maybe you're not sure who's taking the test, or maybe the student is looking away or missing, got up and they left. So you have some data points here that make it easy for you, again, to quickly determine if maybe something went wrong or the student was doing something dishonest. Now, underneath here, you have a list of the flags right away. And these, again, are specific events that are pointed out to you where the student may be doing something wrong, like they got up and they left. They're missing from the frame. And this little explanation link will explain to you what that means. So missing, you know, they left, we can click on the timestamp right here and it will take you to that point in time. Now, she's missing from the frame because she turned away, right? So maybe she was cheating, maybe not, maybe it's an open book test and it doesn't matter. But there's also flags for things like different person in frame, which means that it's a different face than the person who started the test, because we're not just doing facial detection, we're doing a little bit of facial recognition as well. So clearly, this is someone else taking this test, probably not above board, unless you were giving collaborative exams, I'm not sure. So you can quickly click on the flags and see that point in time in the video. You also can see something called milestones, and these are specific points of time throughout the entire video that can give you a little bit more information. So for example, if I want to know where that flag happened, I can tell she was working on question 7. She was somewhere between question 6 and 7 here. So that can be very useful information about the exam session as well. Underneath the video itself, you have a player. We have this timeline that points out the red bits are the flags. I can drag this around to whatever point I need it to be. Maybe I want to skip ahead. Also underneath the video player and the flagging information are these thumbnails. Oops, sorry, it's skipping around a little bit. These are snapshots taken at a random interval throughout the entire video, so it's very easy to scan this very quickly. And you can see, you know, she left, somebody else came in the frame, something was going on here that wasn't right. So it's very easy to, these thumbnails are not necessarily associated with the flags, they're just taken at a random interval, so again, it's really easy to scan this information. Also in these thumbnails, you're gonna see those bits from the startup sequence. Remember we talked about the photo of the student. There's also an ID. If you use that, this is where you can confirm the student's name and face. You can watch the environment video from here if you want to, and it will play the video above. Oops, again, that's skipping around, of the student taking, oh, can't get to the top here, of the student taking the video of their surroundings, so we can see her keyboard and those types of things. And the other feature here is called Photo on File, and this is the ability for your institution to connect official photos with the Respondus monitor system so that you're able to you know, look at maybe the photos that were taken as part of student IDs and compare them to the photo of the student actually taking the test. Now, the other thing, just to show you an example of here is a video that's not very interesting. And this is actually more typical of what you might see. A low priority video, there's one small flag, there's not, a short flag. There's not a lot going on in this video. If you look at the thumbnails, she's mostly sitting in the same place, maybe fidgeting or moving around a little bit. But this is more like what you might expect to see. Because, again, students know they're being recorded. They know that they're on camera. They know that you have access to this video. So therefore, they're a lot less likely to cheat or do something really dishonest. Respondus Monitor was built to be a deterrent to cheating. The goal was not to have instructors watch lots and lots of boring videos of students taking tests, but really be able to quickly scan this data, use that review priority system, use some of this information to dig deeper if you need to, but that is where your effort and time would be focused instead of reviewing everything. In fact, I hear from instructors that sometimes they spend very little time looking at most students' videos. It's really only the ones that look problematic that they would spend time on, if that happens. All right, so that is the instructor's perspective of using Respondus Monitor, both before and after a test. What I want to show you now is what this all looks like from the student's point of view. So the student, to take a test that requires Respondus Monitor, needs LockDown browser. We've already talked about what that process looks like. They also need a webcam, and that can be any webcam that works with the computer and passes that webcam check. So internal, external, it doesn't really matter. They can use whatever they have available. So for me to take the test, I just need to get to my desktop one more time. I am going to open LockDown browser again, just like we did before. Log into my online course. Now remember, everything we talked about with LockDown browser is still going to be working now. Oops, I did the wrong password. I can't copy, paste, print, open other applications or files. And in addition, now that I'm using Respondus Monitor, I'm going to be recorded. So here's our week 3 quiz that requires LockDown browser plus a webcam. Now, last time when I started the quiz, I saw test questions because I was in LockDown browser and that was all that was required of me. Now I'm using Respondus Monitor, so I need to go through this list over here at the left. Those are the startup sequence items that we set up as an instructor for this test. So you can see the photo and ID and all those other pieces. If you didn't require the photo or ID, they wouldn't show up here. This is based on what was selected for the test. The student agrees to a terms of use, and then they move right into that webcam check. You're going to see me in a moment. Hi, everybody. So this is the webcam check that's not just making sure I'm sitting in the right place in front of my computer, my camera. It's also going to have the student record a brief video of themselves, and it tells the student to speak out loud or make some noise in that video because we're looking for a microphone and recording audio as well as video. So again, if you see something wrong in the video after the exam, you can also hear what was going on. A student talking maybe to themselves or maybe to another person who's helping them cheat. So the student needs a webcam and a working microphone. This is also checking my bandwidth, my internet connection, system requirements, little things like that in the background. You didn't notice any of that because I passed. But if a student doesn't pass any of those checks, it will tell them right away. Hey, we couldn't detect a microphone. Please make sure that it's enabled or turned up or whatever. It will give them directions for resolving whatever obstacle might be in their way. And generally speaking, we can take care of that even before they take a test. And we'll talk about that in the best practices. But I passed, so I'm going to click continue. Now we move into whatever the next step in the startup sequence as deemed by my instructor, in this case, a student photo. So all I need to do is smile for the camera and click take picture. And there's the photo that my instructor could use to verify my identity. And maybe they can use the show identification step, which is this here. It also has me take a photo, but this time there's my ID. So we're going to make sure that that's my name, that's my face, and I'm doing my own work. Here's that environment video. So we talked about this a little bit with the environment check, where you might have students record, what's around them. You might not use this. It's really up to you. If you do, though, you can write whatever directions you need here, and the student simply clicks Start Recording, and then they're going to take their camera and move it around. Now, if they're using a laptop or an iPad that has a built-in camera, they might just need to pick that thing up and do one of these. It's a brief video. Unplugging it for a minute shouldn't be a very big deal. But if they have an external camera and you want a really detailed video, maybe you require that. That's really up to you or your institution. I have an external camera, so I'm going to take it and just quickly show you, the side of my office. There's my plant. And here's my monitor screen. And, you can narrate it too. Sometimes students do that, so you can kind of see what's around me. And then they stop recording. Now the video will play back because we want the student to be able to make sure that they took the right video, they follow the directions. When they click continue, there's a little step here that says, hey, we know you moved your webcam or your screen. Make sure that you are still sitting in the same place so the webcam isn't pointed, at the ceiling like that, because we don't want a recording of the ceiling. The other thing you're going to notice at this point in the process of the startup sequence is I'm being recorded right now, but I'm not in the test yet. So if you look in the upper right-hand corner right there, it says recording. And that is the indicator that tells the student when the camera is on. This piece that's being recorded now is a snippet called the pre-exam video. So if I use the environment check, we actually keep the camera running because we don't want the student to then, film an empty desktop and then take out a bunch of notes and devices and things they could use to cheat. So they're going to be on camera during that gap. And they know that. The recording icon's there, the green light on their camera is on if they have one, and so on. These are those additional instructions if you use those, and then we begin the exam. And I won't go through all of the features of LockDown Browser again, but they are exactly the same. This is in the LockDown Browser. It's the same quiz we took before, so it's the same content settings and all of those things as you set it up in your learning system. The only difference right now is I'm being recorded. And again, you can see that in the upper right-hand corner where it says recording. So I'm just gonna, guess, actually, I think I know the answer to that one. I'm gonna guess the answers to these questions and click submit. When I click submit and the test gets submitted, the camera icon and the recording stops, it goes away. So the recording is over, and now it will be processed to flag and prioritize and all those things so it can be displayed to instructors and you can review if you need to. So that was LockDown Browser and Respondus Monitor. I'm going to take the last couple of minutes before we get to your questions to talk a little bit about getting started. I know there was a big chunk of you who've never used LockDown Browser before, so it's worth mentioning how you get your hands on it. Now, instructors, you don't need to actually install the browser yourselves. Students are the ones who are using LockDown Browser. However, it's a good idea as instructors, as you're setting up your test and you're going to use these tools, to go ahead and try it yourselves. Or at least know how to get it, because students might ask you. You're going to want to get your hands on the download link for your institution. Either know where to find it or get it from your license administrator. This is an example of what the download screen looks like. This isn't a real one. Don't copy the web address. This is what a student will see right before they install the browser. So they're getting a bit of information about the browser. There is a little overview video here for students. That is generally all they need to understand this. It explains why we're using these tools and how. And then they install it themselves. And that takes maybe 2 minutes on a decent internet connection. So that's all the student needs to do to install the browser. It's a one-time installation, and then they can use it as much as they need to. Now, if you don't know where to find your LockDown Browser link, I can tell you where to get it, or you can ask your local license administrator. Sometimes that's also your LMS administrator, your Blackboard admin or Canvas admin. If you don't even know who that is, go ahead and email us. We'll point you in the right direction. That's our licensing team who can tell you who to call. But there is another place you can get the LockDown Browser download link, or at least directions on how to find it, and that is in the welcome screen that is in the LockDown Browser dashboard that instructors get to see. So it's worth it to go back there and show you that again. I'll go back to an online course and go open up that LockDown Browser dashboard. So remember, this screen was the first screen we saw. There were the videos, and then on the Getting Started tab right here, you're seeing a couple of resources that will be really useful for you, especially as you're getting started. Specifically, this information for your syllabus. This is a chunk of text that you can copy and edit and then put in your own course to give students directions on how to use these tools. So don't feel like you have to write any of this yourselves. But in these directions, you'll either get the link itself for your institution or the directions about how to get to that link, because some learning systems have it embedded as a part of how the integration works. So that's another place you can find that. Again, that was the Getting Started tab, item number 2 in those welcome screen resources. So when you're going to first use these tools, or if you're adding the webcam to your LockDown browser requirements, the first thing I always recommend to instructors is to try it themselves, especially if you have some unusual settings in your exams or content you want to use. You want to make sure everything is going to work as you expected, that you've set it up correctly. It helps to see what the experience looks like from the student's perspective, because you're the one that's going to be telling them what they need to do to take your exams. So go ahead and try it yourselves. You can download the browser and take a practice quiz on your own if you want to. It also will help you decide which settings to use for your tests. Maybe you want that early exit feature turned off because you're giving your tests in your classroom. Maybe you want only the photo, but not the ID, or none of those pieces are relevant because you know what your students look like. You have a lot of options under advanced settings in the startup sequence of ways you can use these tools. So even that experience of using it yourself will then help you determine how you use these settings and how you customize those exams. And then last but not least, I think the most important thing really is to prepare your students. You're their first line of defense. You're the person who tells them what's expected of them in their courses. So make sure to tell them what's expected and how they take exams. Again, you can use that sample wording that's in the welcome screen. It's also on our website. I think, though, the most important thing you can do for students is to have them practice. Have them take a test or quiz at the beginning of the semester. It's August, so coming up on the beginning of the semester, it's a good time to do it right away. What a practice quiz is something that is low or no stakes. It's not graded, or it's very few points, or it's homework or extra credit. It's not a high stress test environment, but it requires LockDown browser and Respondus monitor, so that students have the opportunity to use these tools to make sure that they've installed the browser, that they have a working webcam, that they have a good internet connection, and that they know exactly what's expected of them when it comes time to take the midterm, the final, or the more important exams. That practice quiz helps them be comfortable, know what to expect from this experience, set up everything correctly. It helps you almost more because you're going to make sure that your students are following your directions. Especially using Respondus Monitor, the practice quiz can be key to making sure that students are taking a video in the way you need them to make sure they're not cheating. So if you aren't giving students the opportunity to practice, and you're not giving them clear directions, they might take videos in the dark, or with a hat covering their face, or knock the camera off kilter, and it doesn't show them in the video. It might flag the whole video, and you don't know if they cheated or did honest work. So use the practice quiz as a way of evaluating. You can take a quick peek at those videos from the practice quiz and give your students feedback. Hey, I saw a bunch of you didn't follow my directions on the environment check. I need you to do that, or I'm going to deduct 20 points or fail or make you take the test over. So that's a really great way, and it does not have to be time consuming, or you can even do something you're already doing if you do a syllabus quiz or an initial homework assignment right away. That on the screen also mentions a feature called the Help Center. That is a tool in the toolbar of LockDown browser. It's a button. It's called Help Center. Students see it, and they can use it if they're having any technical trouble. It will allow them to do a webcam check, a system and network check, and they don't have to start a test. So if they have any concerns about their hardware, about their internet connection, you can direct them to that. They can also run a report and send it to your help desk or ours if they need further assistance. So they don't have to come to you with technical questions. All right, I've talked enough. I have one quick question for everybody as we leave today's webinar. As you leave the GoToWebinar platform, you'll see the survey pop up that says, what are your greatest concerns or challenges as they relate to online testing? Now, I'm guessing you're here because cheating is at the top of that list or foremost on your minds. However, Are there other things you're specifically concerned about? I would really love your answers. I read every single one. Sometimes I can help. Sometimes it's just good to know what's on your minds, because we, Respondus, as a company, are always refining our materials, our training resources, and even the features in our applications to meet your actual needs, not needs we make up. So I'd love to hear your thoughts. You know, are they technological? Are they policy? Are there specific things you're afraid students are doing? We'd love to hear. So thank you in advance for answering that survey question. Now, what I'd like to do is take questions from you. So we're going to take a couple minutes to read aloud some of those questions.